I should have noticed the warning signs earlier, the hushed conversations that would abruptly end when I entered the room. How my parents would shower my brothers with praise for their conventional career choices, while my entrepreneurial ideas were met with tight smiles. The way family dinners became a showcase for my brother's achievements, while my successes were treated as lucky accidents. But nothing could have prepared me for that rainy Sunday afternoon when my father, Julian Montgomery, the man who I thought believed in all his children equally, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Eliza, we've decided that your brothers will inherit everything, the family business, the properties, all of it. It's just how things need to be. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." The words hung in the air of my parents' elegant dining room like a physical blow. I remember how my fork clattered against the fine china plate, how the grandfather clock in the hallway suddenly seemed impossibly loud. The crystal chandelier that my mother had imported from Italy cast shadows that made everyone's faces look unfamiliar, almost sinister. "Excuse me?" I managed, my voice barely audible. My father cleared his throat, smoothing down his expensive silk tie, a nervous habit he'd had for as long as I could remember. "Montgomery Construction has always been passed down through the male line. It's tradition, Eliza. Simon and Nathan will take over the company when I retire. They've been training for this their whole lives." I looked around the table desperately, searching for an ally. My older brother Simon, 32, stared intently at his roast beef, refusing to meet my eyes. Nathan, 28, had the decency to look uncomfortable, but his discomfort didn't translate into speaking up. My mother, Catherine, sat with perfect posture, her face a practiced mask of calm that betrayed nothing. "But I've worked for the company for 5 years, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I have an MBA from Wharton. I've brought in 3 major clients this year alone." "And we appreciate that, darling," my mother interjected, her voice syrupy sweet. "But you have other talents. Your design sense, your people skills. Perhaps interior design would be more suitable? We could set you up with a little boutique firm." A little boutique firm. As if my ambitions were a cute hobby that needed to be accommodated rather than a career I'd been building. As if my degree from one of the top business schools in the country meant nothing compared to my brother's state university diplomas. "Dad, this isn't fair." I tried again. "I've earned my place in the company. I've proven myself." My father sighed heavily, as if my resistance was exhausting him. "Eliza, the construction industry is still a man's world. Our clients expect to deal with men. The subcontractors respect men. It's just reality." Simon finally looked up, a hint of sympathy in his eyes that quickly hardened to resolution. "It's not personal, Liz. It's business. The company needs strong leadership that clients can respect." "Strong leadership," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "And you think I'm not strong enough because I'm a woman?" "No one's saying that." Nathan jumped in, always the peacemaker. "It's just tradition, the Montgomery name." I laughed then, a short, hollow sound. "The Montgomery name. I'm a Montgomery too. Or have you all forgotten that?" My father's expression darkened. "That's enough, Eliza. The decision has been made. When you marry, you'll change your name anyway. Simon and Nathan will carry on the Montgomery legacy." The casual dismissal of my identity, the assumption that my only future was as an extension of some unnamed future husband, it crystallized everything I had felt but couldn't articulate for years. The subtle diminishment, the lowered expectations, the way my ideas were always considered creative suggestions rather than strategic directives. "And what exactly am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice steadier now as a strange calm settled over me. "Watch while my brothers inherit a $50 million company that I helped build? Accept some token payout as consolation?" My mother's smile tightened. "We've set up a trust for you, darling. It's quite generous. You'll be comfortable." "Comfortable," I repeated, like a pet that needs to be provided for. "You're being dramatic," my father said dismissively. "This is how family businesses work. It's how it's always been done." At that moment, something shifted inside me. A door closing, perhaps, or maybe opening. I carefully placed my napkin beside my plate and stood up. "Where are you going?" my mother asked, the alarm finally breaking through her perfect composure. "We haven't finished discussing this." "Yes, we have," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You've made the decision, and I've heard it. There's nothing more to discuss." "Eliza, sit down," my father commanded, using the tone that had always made me comply throughout my childhood. "Not this time." "No, Dad, I won't. You've made it clear where I stand in this family. You've shown me exactly how much my education, my work, my dedication to Montgomery Construction is worth." I looked at each of them in turn, my father with his flushed face, my mother with her practiced concern, Simon with his poorly disguised relief, and Nathan with his genuine but ultimately useless conflict. "I quit," I said simply. "Quit what?" my father demanded. "Montgomery Construction, the family, all of it." I moved toward the door, each step feeling strangely liberating. "You've decided I'm not a true Montgomery, not one worth investing in. So I'll build something of my own." "With what?" Simon called after me, a hint of mockery in his voice. "Your trust fund?" I paused at the doorway and turned back. "Keep the trust fund. I don't want your charity. What you don't know, what none of you have bothered to notice, is that I've been preparing for this day for longer than you realize." That got their attention. My father's expression shifted from anger to uncertainty. "What are you talking about?" he asked. I smiled, not with joy, but with determination. "My backup plan. The one I started building 2 years ago when Simon got promoted over me despite my superior performance. The one I've been quietly developing nights and weekends when you all thought I was just being social. You'll find out soon enough." As I walked out into the crisp autumn air, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of their expectations, their limitations, their dismissal, all of it fell away with each step I took. What they didn't know then, what none of them could have possibly imagined, was that my backup plan wasn't just some fantasy or small side project. It was Monarch Development, my own company that had already secured its first major contract, poached 2 of Montgomery Construction's top project managers, and was about to revolutionize how eco-friendly commercial buildings were designed and built in our city. They thought they were writing me out of the family legacy. They never expected I was already writing my own. That night, I sat in my downtown loft apartment, hands trembling as I poured myself a glass of the expensive Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion. This wasn't the celebration I'd envisioned, but it felt fitting. The end of one chapter, the true beginning of another. The rain that had started during dinner now lashed against my floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights blurred and distorted through the streaming water. My phone buzzed incessantly on the kitchen counter. Calls from my mother, texts from Nathan. "Come back, Liz. Dad will calm down." One message from Simon, surprisingly, though it contained no apology. "You're making a mistake. The industry will eat you alive." I silenced the phone and moved to my home office, where the real evidence of my backup plan covered nearly every surface. Architectural renderings for a mixed-use development that would incorporate solar panels, living walls, and rainwater collection systems. Investor presentations with detailed projections. Permits already filed with the city planning department. For 2 years, I'd been laying the groundwork for Monarch Development, named for the butterfly that completely transforms itself. I'd leveraged my position at Montgomery Construction to build relationships with suppliers, subcontractors, and city officials. I'd studied the gaps in the market that my father was too traditional to see. The growing demand for sustainable buildings, the untapped potential of urban rehabilitation projects, My computer dinged with an email notification. It was from Diane Zhang, the venture capitalist who had seen potential in my vision when I'd pitched it 6 months ago. Eliza, the funds have been transferred. $2.8 million as agreed. Looking forward to breaking ground next month. DZ, I touched the screen almost reverently. Not family money, not a trust fund or an inheritance. Capital I'd earned through my own merits, my own vision, my own determination. The vindication I'd craved all day suddenly felt hollow, though. I hadn't wanted to leave Montgomery Construction. Despite everything, I'd hoped my father would eventually recognize my value, that my brothers would see me as an equal, that we could transform the family business together. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the photo I kept there, the three of us at a construction site, hard hats on, arms around each other's shoulders. Simon, Nathan, and me. We were smiling, covered in dust, proud of the building rising behind us. It was from 5 years ago, my first day at Montgomery Construction after graduating from Wharton, before I fully understood how the family hierarchy worked. A knock at my door startled me out of my memories. It was late, nearly midnight. I approached, cautiously, checking the peephole, then pulled the door open in surprise. Nathan? My younger brother stood in the hallway, drenched from the rain, his usual self-assured expression replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "Can I come in?" he asked, water dripping onto the expensive hallway carpet. I stepped aside silently, watching as he took in my apartment with new eyes. He'd been here before for dinners, for the occasional movie night, but now he was seeing it as the headquarters of a competitor, not just his sister's home. "Mom's upset," he said finally, running a hand through his wet hair. Dad's furious." "I imagine he is," I replied, handing him a towel from the hall closet. "What are you doing here, Nathan?" He dabbed at his face and hair, then looked at me directly. "You're really doing this? Starting your own development company?" "I'm not starting it. It already exists. We will break ground on our first major project. Next month." He let out a low whistle. "How long have you been planning this? Since Dad promoted Simon to VP of Operations over me, despite my department outperforming his by 20%. Nathan had the decency to look embarrassed. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. You never asked. None of you did. You were all too busy assuming I'd eventually leave to have children, or marry someone wealthy, or find some cute little hobby to occupy my time." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "That's not fair," Nathan protested, but weakly. "I always thought you were talented, but not talented enough to be considered for real leadership. Not talented enough to inherit any part of the company our grandfather built." Nathan slumped onto my couch, the fight draining out of him. "Did you hear what happened after you left?" I shook my head, curiosity overcoming my anger. "Dad called an emergency board meeting. He wants to write you out of the company bylaws completely, remove any legal claim you might have." He paused, then added reluctantly, "Simon agreed immediately." The pain was sharper than I'd expected. Simon and I had been close once, before competition and my father's favoritism had driven a wedge between us. "And you?" I asked quietly. Nathan looked down at his hands. I abstained, told them I needed to think about it. Not opposition, but not agreement either. It was the most rebellion Nathan had ever shown. "Dad sent me to convince you to come back," he admitted. "To apologize, accept the trust fund, maybe take that interior design position Mom suggested." I laughed, a genuine laugh this time. "And what do you think I should do?" Nathan looked around. At my office. At the renderings and permits and evidence of my preparation. For the first time, he seemed to be seeing me, really seeing me as a business person, not just his little sister. "I think," he said slowly, "that Montgomery Construction might have made a serious mistake. A small crack in the family unity. A tiny acknowledgement of my value, It wasn't much, but it was something. It's late, I said, softening slightly. You can take the guest room if you want. He nodded gratefully, but as he headed toward the hallway, he paused. What happens now, Liz? I looked at my computer screen, at Diane Jiang's email confirming that Monarch Development was now fully funded and ready to compete directly with my family's company. I thought about the clients I'd cultivated, the innovative approaches I'd developed that my father had dismissed as impractical, the talented team I'd quietly assembled. Now, I said with quiet confidence, I'm going to build something extraordinary, and I'm going to do it without the Montgomery name. Nathan studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you will. As I closed my bedroom door that night, I realized that the hurt and anger were still there, but something else was growing stronger: determination. My family had underestimated me for the last time. The trust that had been betrayed, the value that had been dismissed, the potential that had been ignored. All of it would fuel what came next. I wasn't just building a company. I was redefining what it meant to be a Montgomery, whether they liked it or not. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. 3 weeks after walking out of my parents' house, I stood in the empty industrial space that would become Monarch Development's headquarters. The building was in the trendy Riverfront district, a former textile factory with soaring ceilings, exposed brick walls, and massive windows that flooded the space with natural light. It needed work, but I saw the potential. Just like my company. What do you think? I asked, turning to Maya Rivera, the project manager I'd managed to lure away from Montgomery Construction with the promise of creative freedom and equity in my startup. Maya walked the perimeter, her experienced eyes assessing the bones of the space. It's perfect, raw, authentic, exactly what we want to project, and the irony isn't lost on me. What irony? I asked, though I already knew. She gestured around the vast room. Montgomery Construction's offices are all mahogany and marble. Everything is polished and traditional and masculine. This is the opposite: adaptive reuse, sustainable renovation, honoring the past while creating something new. She smiled. It's very you, Eliza. I nodded, feeling a surge of pride. Maya got it. She understood what I was trying to build, not just a company, but a statement. A new vision for what construction and development could be in our city. We'll need to move fast, I said, checking my watch. The Parkside project groundbreaking is in 3 weeks, and we need a functioning headquarters before then. The Parkside project was our first major development, a mixed-use space combining retail, affordable housing, and green community areas on what had been a neglected lot at the edge of the city's most popular park. It was exactly the kind of innovative, community-focused development my father had always dismissed as unprofitable bleeding heart projects. But my research showed otherwise. The city had offered tax incentives for sustainable development, and pre-leasing interest was already strong. The construction team is confirmed, Maya said, scrolling through her tablet. Materials are ordered. We're just waiting on the final permit, which should come through next week. And the media invitations for the groundbreaking? Sent, including the Business Chronicle. She gave me a knowing look. The Business Chronicle was the publication my father read religiously every morning with his coffee. The publication that had featured Montgomery Construction's projects for decades, but had never mentioned my contributions. Good, I said simply. Just then, the door opened, and Tom Chen, the second executive I'd poached from Montgomery Construction, entered with a concerned expression. Tom had been my ally for years, the one person at the company who had always taken my ideas seriously. When I'd approached him about joining Monarch, he hadn't hesitated. We might have a problem, he said, skipping any greeting. The zoning commissioner just called. Someone has filed a complaint about the Parkside project, claiming our environmental impact study is inadequate. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the unheated warehouse. Who filed the complaint? Tom hesitated, then met my eyes directly. Officially, it's anonymous. Unofficially, the commissioner mentioned it came from someone at Montgomery Construction. The betrayal stung, but it didn't surprise me. My father had never been one to accept defeat gracefully. If he couldn't have my talent and ideas within his company, he'd try to ensure they couldn't flourish elsewhere. Options? I asked, already mentally reviewing our permits and studies. We can expedite a new study, Maya suggested. It'll cost extra, but do it, I interrupted. And Tom, call Councilwoman Garcia. She's been a champion for green development. See if she can put in a good word with the commission. They nodded, already making notes and sending messages. This was why I'd wanted them on my team, their ability to pivot quickly, to solve problems without unnecessary drama. There's one more thing, Tom said, his expression softening slightly. Simon was asking about you yesterday. I stiffened at the mention of my older brother. Professionally or personally? Both, I think. He said, and I'm quoting here, "Is she really going through with this nonsense?" I laughed despite myself. So, typical of Simon. The dismissal, the condescension barely masked as concern. What did you tell him? Tom grinned. I told him to read the Business Chronicle next month. That evening, as I worked late in what would become my office, currently just a folding table and my laptop, I received an email that made my heart race. It was from Edward Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Properties, one of the largest developers in the region, and not coincidentally, Montgomery Construction's biggest client. Ms. Montgomery, I've been following your new venture with interest. Your proposal for sustainable urban development aligns with our company's evolving vision. Would you be available to discuss potential collaboration? EB, I read it 3 times, to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Blackwell Properties had been with Montgomery Construction since before I was born. My father played golf with Edward Blackwell every Sunday. For him to reach out to me, to Monarch Development, was more than a business opportunity. It was a seismic shift in the local development landscape. My phone rang before I could even process what this meant. Nathan's number flashed on the screen. Have you seen it? He asked without preamble when I answered. Seen what? Dad's email. Simon forwarded it to me. Blackwell is considering moving some projects to Monarch. So that explained the call. News traveled fast in our industry, especially when it involved a high-profile client potentially jumping ship. Edward just reached out, I confirmed, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the triumph singing in my veins. Dad's livid, Nathan said, his voice a mixture of awe and concern. I've never seen him like this. He threw his phone across the conference room. I should have felt vindicated. Isn't this what I'd wanted? To prove my worth? To show my father and brothers that I was a force to be reckoned with? Instead, I felt a strange hollowness. I didn't solicit Blackwell, I said truthfully. This was his initiative. I know, Nathan replied quietly. That's what makes it worse for Dad. The fact that Blackwell came to you, not the other way around. It means he sees value in what you're building. Value. The one thing my father had never fully granted me. Are you calling to ask me to turn it down? I asked, suddenly suspicious. Because if that's why— No, Nathan interrupted. God, no. I'm calling because— He paused, then continued with newfound conviction. I'm calling because I'm proud of you, Liz. You're doing exactly what you said you would. You're building something extraordinary. My eyes stung with unexpected tears. After years of being overlooked, of having my achievements minimized, of being told I wasn't quite enough, here was my brother, finally seeing me. Thank you, I managed. There was a long pause before Nathan spoke again. I should go. Dad's called another emergency meeting. Just be careful, okay? He's not going to take this lying down. After we hung up, I sat in the empty warehouse that would soon become Monarch. Development's headquarters surrounded by potential and promise and newfound freedom. I thought about Edward Blackwell's email, about the Parkside project that would break ground in 3 weeks, about Maya and Tom and the team that believed in my vision. My father had taught me the Montgomery way, traditional, conservative, resistant, to change. But in pushing me out, in deciding I wasn't worthy of the family legacy, he had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to create something entirely my own, unbound by outdated traditions and limitations. Opened my laptop and began to type a response to Edward Blackwell. Not with gloating or triumph, but with the quiet confidence of someone who finally knew her own worth. Mr. Blackwell, I would be delighted to discuss potential collaboration. Monarch Development is committed to innovative, sustainable projects that serve communities while delivering strong returns for investors. Would tomorrow at 2 p.m. work for your schedule? Eliza Montgomery, CEO, Monarch Development CEO. My title, earned through vision and determination, not inherited or bestowed by family favor. As I hit send, I realized I wasn't just starting from scratch. I was creating something better than what I'd left behind. The morning of the Parkside groundbreaking dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for new beginnings. I stood at the edge of the vacant lot, watching as workers set up chairs and a small podium, the Monarch Development banner fluttering in the gentle breeze. "Nervous?" Maya asked, joining me with 2 coffees in hand. She passed me one, the familiar gesture a small comfort amid the day's pressure. "Not nervous," I replied, taking a sip. "Just ready." It wasn't entirely true. My stomach had been in knots since dawn. This wasn't just our first project. It was my public declaration of independence from Montgomery Construction, my statement to the city's business community that I was a force to be reckoned with. The guest list included city officials, potential investors, community leaders, and local press. My future quite literally depended on making a strong first impression. "The new environmental impact study cleared yesterday," Maya said, scrolling through her phone. "Final permits are approved. We're good to go." I nodded, relief washing over me. The anonymous complaint, which we both knew had come from my family's company, had cost us an extra $30,000 and nearly 2 weeks of delays. It had been the first direct attack, but I doubted it would be the last. "Any word on who's coming from the Business Chronicle?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Maya gave me a knowing look. "Dominic Lewis, their senior editor. Apparently, he specifically requested the assignment." Another small victory. Dominic Lewis was the most respected business journalist in the city. If he was covering our groundbreaking personally, it meant Monarch Development was already being taken seriously. "Good," I said simply, finishing my coffee. "Let's make sure he gets a proper interview." As attendees began to arrive, I greeted each one personally, shaking hands and thanking them for coming. The city's deputy mayor, representatives from the neighborhood association, several small business owners who had already leased space in the retail portion of our development. And then I saw him, Edward Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Properties and my father's longtime friend and client, striding across the lot toward me. Our meeting earlier that week had gone well, with Blackwell expressing genuine interest in Monarch's approach to sustainable development, but I hadn't expected him to attend the groundbreaking. "Ms. Montgomery," he said, extending his hand. "Quite the turnout for your debut." I shook his hand firmly, maintaining eye contact. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm honored you could make it." He surveyed the site, nodding appreciatively. "It's a good location, underutilized. Your father always considered it too small for a worthwhile project." I bit back the defensive response that rose immediately to my lips. "We see it differently. Sometimes the most impactful developments aren't the largest." Blackwell studied me for a long moment, then smiled slightly. "You're very different from Julian, you know. He sees buildings. You see communities." Before I could respond, a commotion at the entrance to the site caught my attention. Tom was speaking with someone, his body language tense. As the figure moved past him, my breath caught in my throat. Simon. My older brother was here, wearing the Montgomery construction hard hat and safety vest, looking as out of place at our eco-friendly groundbreaking as a wolf among sheep. "Excuse me," I said to Blackwell, who had also noticed Simon's arrival. "I need to handle this." I intercepted Simon before he could reach the gathering crowd, pulling him aside behind the equipment trailer. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. Keeping my voice low, Simon's expression was a mixture of discomfort and defiance. "Professional courtesy, checking out the competition." Professional courtesy would have been RSVPing, I countered. Not showing up unannounced wearing Montgomery construction gear to my groundbreaking. He had the decency to look slightly abashed. "Dad doesn't know I'm here." That surprised me. Simon had always been my father's perfect soldier, following orders, without question. "Then why are you?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. The same nervous gesture Nathan had. For a moment, I saw the brother I'd grown up with, not the corporate rival he'd become. "I wanted to see for myself," he finally admitted. "What you're building, if it's real." "It's real," I confirmed, anger giving way to a strange pride. I wanted Simon to see this, to understand what I was capable of without our father's approval or the Montgomery name to open doors. The Parkside project is fully funded, fully permitted, and breaking ground today. We have pre-leased 70% of the retail space and have a waiting list for the residential units. Monarch development isn't just real, Simon. It's thriving. He nodded slowly, his eyes taking in the site, the gathered crowd, the Monarch banners. "I see that." Then more quietly, "I didn't think you'd actually do it." "You didn't think I could," I corrected him. "No," Simon said, surprising me again. "I knew you could. I just didn't think you would." Walking away from the family, from the security, from everything Dad built, it took courage. Courage. Not the word I'd expected from Simon, who had always dismissed my ideas as impractical, who had accepted his position as heir apparent without questioning the unfairness of excluding me. Before I could respond, Tom approached, his expression concerned. "Eliza, we need to start. The deputy mayor has another engagement in an hour." I nodded, then turned back to Simon. "You can stay if you want, but lose the Montgomery gear." He hesitated, then removed the hard hat and vest, setting them inside the equipment trailer. "I'll stay," he said simply. The ceremony went perfectly. I delivered my speech with confidence, emphasizing Monarch's commitment to sustainable development and community integration. The deputy mayor spoke about the city's support for innovative projects. Representatives from the neighborhood association expressed their enthusiasm for the revitalization of the area. As I turned the ceremonial first shovel of dirt, cameras flashing and applause rising from the crowd, I caught sight of Simon standing at the back. His expression was unreadable, but the fact that he had stayed, that he was witnessing this moment, it meant something. What I didn't see, which none of us noticed until it was too late, was the small group of protesters gathering just outside the site's perimeter. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to mingle, their chants suddenly became audible. "Stop the gentrification! Homes for people, not profit." A dozen or so protesters had appeared, carrying handmade signs opposing the development. Several. Reporters immediately gravitated toward them, cameras and microphones at the ready. My heart sank. This was exactly the kind of negative publicity that could sink a new development company. I looked to Maya and Tom, who were already moving toward the protesters, trying to engage them in conversation rather than confrontation. "Not what you expected?" Simon asked, suddenly beside me. "Did you know about this?" I demanded, suspicion flaring instantly. He looked genuinely surprised. "What?" No. Why would you think? Because it's exactly the kind of thing Dad would orchestrate to undermine me, I said bluntly. Simon's expression hardened. Not everything is about you versus… Dad, Eliza, maybe these people have legitimate concerns about your project. Before I could respond, Dominic Lewis from the Business Chronicle approached, notepad in hand. Ms. Montgomery, care to comment on the protest? I took a deep breath, centering myself. This was a test. How I responded in this moment could define Monarch's public image moving forward. Monarch Development believes in community dialogue, I said carefully. Our Parkside project includes affordable housing units, green spaces accessible to all residents, and local business opportunities specifically reserved for neighborhood entrepreneurs. We've held 3 community forums during the planning process, and we've incorporated feedback from residents. But we're always open to hearing additional concerns. Lewis nodded, making notes. And what would you say to critics who suggest that any development in this area will inevitably lead to increased property values and displacement of current residents? It was a fair question, one I'd anticipated, during the planning phase. We've structured this project specifically to minimize those impacts. 20% of the residential units are permanently designated as affordable housing, with priority given to current neighborhood residents. We're also establishing a community benefit fund from project revenues to support local initiatives. Lewis seemed impressed, jotting down my response. From the corner of my eye, I saw Simon listening intently, his expression thoughtful. After the interview, as the crowd began to disperse and workers started the actual site preparation, Simon approached me one last time. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" he asked, something like grudging respect in his voice. "I've tried to," I admitted. "This isn't just about proving Dad wrong, Simon. It's about building something better." He nodded slowly. "I can see that." He paused, then added, "Dad's watching the Business Chronicle coverage right now. He'll know I was here." I understood the implication. By attending my groundbreaking, Simon had taken a step away from our father's absolute control and had acknowledged my venture as legitimate. It wasn't supported, not exactly, but it was something. "Will you be okay?" I asked, surprising myself with genuine concern. Simon's smile was wry. "I'm still the heir apparent, remember, the golden child." Then, more seriously, "But things are changing at Montgomery Construction. Dad's struggling. With you gone, with Blackwell potentially moving projects to Monarch. It's not the company it was." As he walked away, I felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction that my absence was being felt, concern for the business that had been part of my life for so long, and a strange, unexpected hope that perhaps this rupture might eventually lead to something better for all of us. Later that night, as I scrolled through the first online reports of the groundbreaking, my phone rang. It was Nathan. "I saw the coverage," he said without preamble. "Looks like it went well despite the protesters." "It did," I confirmed. Simon came. There was a pause. "I know. He told me. Dad's furious." "I didn't invite him," I said quickly. "I know that too," Nathan replied. "That's what makes it significant. Simon came on his own, to see what you're building. Something was shifting in my family, subtle cracks appearing in the united front they had presented when I'd walked out." I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I felt for the first time that I wasn't just building a company. I was possibly, slowly, rebuilding connections that I had thought were severed forever. But the path forward would not be smooth. The protests, while small, had garnered media attention. The anonymous complaints about our permits suggested my father wasn't above using bureaucratic obstacles to slow me down, and I was still a new, untested developer in a field dominated by established companies, including Montgomery Construction. The groundbreaking was just the beginning. The real test would be delivering on our promises, proving that Monarch's vision was both practical and profitable. I had broken ground not just on a building site, but on a new chapter in my life, one where I would be judged solely on my own merits, not as Julian Montgomery's daughter. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 6 months after the groundbreaking, I stood at the edge of the Parkside construction site, watching as workers installed the distinctive green roof that had become Monarch Development's signature feature. The project was taking shape exactly as I had envisioned it: modern, sustainable, integrated with the surrounding neighborhood rather than imposing upon it. "We're 3 weeks ahead of schedule," Maya noted, checking something on her tablet. "And still within budget, despite the steel price increases." "The subcontractors?" I asked, scanning the busy site. "Happy," Tom confirmed, joining us with 3 coffees, a daily ritual we'd maintained since the groundbreaking. "You know why? We pay on time. Apparently that's rare in this industry." He gave me a meaningful look. I nodded, understanding the implication. Montgomery Construction was notorious for stretching payment terms, using their size and influence to dictate when subcontractors got paid. It was one of many practices I had quietly disagreed with during my time there, and one of many I had deliberately changed at Monarch. "The Business Chronicle is running a feature on the project next week," Maya said, scrolling through her phone. "Dominic Lewis wants final photos once the green roof is complete." Another small victory. The Business Chronicle had covered our groundbreaking, but a feature article was significant recognition. The industry was watching Monarch, and so far we were delivering on our promises. "Perfect timing," I replied. "The Blackwell proposal is due next Friday. The publicity won't hurt." The Blackwell proposal represented a potential quantum leap for Monarch, a major mixed-use development on riverfront property that Edward Blackwell had purchased years ago, but never developed. If we secured this contract, it would elevate Monarch, from promising startup to established player practically overnight. It would also be a direct challenge to Montgomery Construction, which had handled all of Blackwell's previous projects. The implications weren't lost on any of us. "Speaking of Blackwell," Tom said cautiously, "have you heard the rumors about Montgomery Construction?" I tensed slightly. Despite my best efforts to focus solely on building Monarch, news of my family's company still affected me more than I cared to admit. "What rumors?" Tom and Maya exchanged glances. "They're laying people off," Maya said finally. 20% of the staff, according to our sources, including some senior project managers who've been there for decades. The information landed like a physical blow. Montgomery Construction had never had layoffs in its 50-year history. My grandfather had famously kept all employees on payroll even during the recession of the early 1980s, working at reduced capacity rather than cutting staff. "That can't be right," I said, more to myself than to them. "Dad would never—" "It's confirmed," Tom interrupted gently. "The announcement went out yesterday. They're citing market adjustments and evolving business needs. Corporate speak for financial trouble." I felt a complicated mix of emotions: concern for the employees losing their jobs, worry for the company that, despite everything, still represented my family's legacy, and guilt that my departure and competition might have contributed to the situation. "Do we know why?" I asked, trying to maintain a professional tone. Maya hesitated. "Multiple factors from what I've heard. They lost the West Side Corporate Park project to Elevation Builders. The Blackwell Riverfront project is up for grabs instead of automatically going to them, and—" She paused. "And?" I prompted. "And they had to refund a major client after quality issues on a recent project. Structural problems that weren't caught until after completion." That was genuinely shocking. Montgomery Construction had built its reputation on quality and reliability. My father was meticulous about inspections, about materials, about craftsmanship. For a project to have structural issues significant enough to warrant a refund was unprecedented. "Which project?" I asked. Tom looked uncomfortable. "The Lakeside Medical Center. Simon was the project manager." "Simon." My perfectionist older brother who had always done everything by the book, who had never failed at anything in his life. The golden child was tarnishing. My phone buzzed with a text message. Nathan again, becoming a more frequent correspondent as the months passed. Can we talk? It's important. I excused myself from Maya and Tom, walking a short distance away to call my brother. What's going on? I asked when he answered. I just heard about the layoffs. Nathan's voice was tight with stress. It's bad, Liz. Worse than people know. The Lakeside project problems are just the beginning. There are issues with 2 other developments, possibly more. How is that possible? I asked, genuinely perplexed. Quality control had been my father's obsession, the cornerstone of Montgomery Construction's reputation. Nathan sighed heavily. Dad's been distracted since you left, angry, making impulsive decisions. The company culture has changed. The guilt intensified. Nathan, I didn't intend— I know, he cut me off. This isn't your fault. Dad's choices are his own, but— He hesitated. But what? Simon and I are worried. About the company, about Dad. He's shutting us out, making decisions without consulting anyone. The layoffs were announced without warning. Even the HR director found out the morning it happened. This wasn't just my father being stubborn or resistant to change. This was something different, something concerning. What can I do? I asked, surprising myself with the offer. Nathan was silent for a moment. Would you meet with us? Simon and me. Not at the office, somewhere neutral. It was the last thing I had expected. A meeting with my brothers, without my father's knowledge, to discuss the family business I had been told I wasn't worthy to inherit. When? I asked. Tonight? O'Malley's at 8 South? O'Malley's was a quiet pub near the university, far from the business district where industry people might recognize us. A strategic choice. I'll be there, I promised. After hanging up, I returned to Maya and Tom, who were tactfully pretending they hadn't been watching my reaction to the phone call. Everything okay? Maya asked. Fine, I said automatically, then corrected myself. These people weren't just my employees, they were my team, my allies. Actually, no, that was Nathan. He wants to meet tonight to discuss Montgomery Construction's situation. Simon will be there too. Their surprise mirrored my own. Is this a good idea? Tom asked cautiously. Given everything that's happened? I wasn't sure. My brothers had stood by while my father disinherited me and had accepted their shares of what should have been a 3-way split. Simon had actively supported writing me out of the company bylaws, and yet— They're still my brothers, I said finally. And something's wrong at Montgomery Construction. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter to me. Maya nodded slowly. Just be careful. Your father won't know about the meeting, I finished for her. And I'm not going to compromise Monarch's position or priorities. This is just information gathering. But as I returned to my office in Monarch's now renovated headquarters, I found myself staring at that same photo I'd kept from my early days at Montgomery Construction. Simon, Nathan, and me in our hard hats, arms around each other, united, in purpose and pride. Whatever happened tonight, whatever my brothers wanted to discuss, I knew one thing with certainty. The Montgomery family would never be the same again. The question was whether we could build something new from the broken pieces, something that might eventually be stronger than what had come before. At O'Malley's that evening, I arrived first, selecting a booth in the back corner where we were, unlikely to be overheard. I ordered a scotch, my father's drink of choice, though I had never particularly enjoyed it, and waited, nervousness churning in my stomach. Simon and Nathan arrived together, both still in their work clothes, both looking far more strained than they had 6 months ago when I'd walked out of the family dinner. They ordered drinks, beer for Nathan, club soda for Simon, and for a moment, none of us seemed to know how to begin. The Parkside project looks good, Simon said finally. surprising me with this acknowledgement. The green roof was a smart addition. Thanks, I replied cautiously. Solar integration will cut energy costs by 30%. Nathan smiled slightly. Always the innovator. The small talk couldn't last. You didn't ask me here to discuss Monarch's design choices, I said, getting to the point. What's happening at Montgomery Construction? My brothers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Dad's running the company into the ground, Simon said bluntly. The layoffs are just the beginning. We've lost 3 major clients in the past 4 months. Quality control is slipping. Morale is at rock bottom. Why? I asked, genuinely confused. Dad's whole identity is wrapped up in Montgomery Construction. He'd never deliberately damage it. It's not deliberate, Nathan said quietly. He searched for the right word. Reactive. Emotional. Every decision seems to be made in response to what you're doing at Monarch. I sat back, stunned. That's ridiculous. Monarch is a fraction of Montgomery's size. We're barely competing. It's not about the competition, Simon clarified, his expression pained. It's about you succeeding without him. Every article about Monarch, every award, every new contract, it's like a personal affront, proof that he was wrong about you. The realization was startling. My father, the stoic businessman who had always preached rational decision-making and strategic thinking, was allowing personal feelings to undermine the very legacy he had been so determined to protect. What do you want from me? I asked cautiously. Another exchanged glances between my brothers. Then Simon, ever direct, laid it out. We want you to come back, he said simply. Not as an employee, as a partner. I nearly choked on my scotch. Partner? After Dad explicitly cut me out of the succession plan? After he said, and I quote, "Your brothers will inherit everything?" Things have changed, Nathan said earnestly. We've changed. Seeing what you've built with Monarch, how you've innovated, how you've attracted clients and talent, it's made us realize what Montgomery Construction has been missing. I looked between them, searching for signs of insincerity, of manipulation. I found none, only genuine concern and what appeared to be respect. Does Dad know you're proposing this? I asked, already knowing the answer. Simon shook his head. No, and he won't like it initially. But the company needs you, Liza. We need you. It was the first time Simon had used my childhood nickname in years. The familiar term of affection, coupled with this unprecedented admission of need, momentarily stripped away my carefully constructed defenses. What would this partnership look like? I asked, not agreeing but not immediately rejecting the idea either. Equal shares, Simon said without hesitation. The 3 of us, 1/3 each. Equal decision-making authority. Dad would remain as the chairman emeritus, but operational control would shift to us. It was more than I had ever expected, more than I had dared to hope for in my most optimistic moments. And yet, what about Monarch? I asked. I've built something I believe in. I have investors, employees, and clients who are counting on me. We've thought about that, Nathan said eagerly. What if Montgomery acquired Monarch? Not to dismantle it, but to incorporate its vision, its sustainability focus, its innovative approach. It could be a division within Montgomery Construction, with you at the helm. The proposal was thoughtful, more generous than I had anticipated. But questions remained. And Dad? I pressed. You really think he'd accept this arrangement after everything that's happened? Simon's expression hardened with determination. He'll have to. The numbers don't lie. Montgomery Construction is in trouble, and your success at Monarch proves you have the vision we need. This isn't charity, Eliza. It's business. Business. The same justification my father had used when cutting me out of the company. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I looked at my brothers, Simon with his newfound humility, Nathan with his earnest hope for reconciliation. I realized that the first real breakthrough wasn't the Parkside project or the potential Blackwell contract, or even Monarch's growing reputation. It was this moment, my brothers acknowledging my value, seeking my help, offering the partnership I had always deserved, but had been denied because of outdated traditions and gender bias. "I need time to think," I said finally. "This affects more than just me now." They nodded, understanding the complexity of the decision. As we parted outside the pub, Simon surprised me with an awkward but genuine hug. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "I want you to know I was wrong. We all were. You've proven that in 6 months." It was as close to an apology as Simon had ever come, and I felt the last hard edges of resentment begin to soften. Not disappear, not yet, but soften enough to allow for possibilities I had thought forever closed. Driving home that night, I realized I stood at a crossroads far more complex than the one I had faced 6 months ago. Then, the choice had been clear: stay and accept inequality or leave and build something of my own. Now, the path forward was murkier, filled with competing loyalties, practical considerations, and emotional reckonings. Monarch was mine, built from nothing but determination and vision. Montgomery Construction was my heritage, the company my grandfather had founded, the legacy I had been told I couldn't share because I was a woman. Could these two worlds merge? Could the breach in my family truly be repaired? And most importantly, could I trust that this change of heart from my brothers was genuine and lasting? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain. My backup plan had worked better than I could have imagined. Not just in building a successful company, but in forcing a reckoning within my family about value, about capability, about who deserved a seat at the table. Whatever I decided, I would be choosing from a position of strength, not desperation. And that, perhaps, was the greatest breakthrough of all. 1 week after my brother's surprising proposal, I stood in Monarch's conference room, surrounded by my team and the investors who had believed in my vision from the beginning. The Blackwell Riverfront proposal, hundreds of pages of detailed plans, renderings, financial projections, and sustainability metrics, was spread across the table. "They're going to accept it," Diane Zhang, my first and most loyal investor, said confidently. "This is the most innovative urban development plan this city has seen in decades." The Blackwell project would be transformative, not just for Monarch Development, which would cement its reputation as a forward-thinking firm, but for the city itself. The riverfront had been industrial wasteland for years, contaminated by the paper mill that had once operated there. Our proposal included extensive remediation, a public riverwalk, mixed-income housing, commercial space, and a central plaza, designed for community gatherings. Montgomery Construction will be competing for this, I reminded everyone. They've handled all of Blackwell's previous projects. But not like this, Maya countered, tapping the section on sustainability features. They've never proposed anything this ambitious, this community-focused. It's not in their DNA. But it was mine. And that was the complicated truth I had been wrestling with since meeting with my brothers. Montgomery Construction, for all its history and reputation, had always played it safe. Conservative designs, traditional methods, predictable outcomes. My father had built a successful company on reliability and consistency. Monarch represented something different: innovation, sustainability, community integration. The question that had been keeping me awake at night: could these two visions coexist under one corporate umbrella? "You're distracted," Tom observed as the meeting broke up and the others filed out. "This is about your brother's offer, isn't it?" I nodded, not surprised that he'd figured it out. Tom had always been perceptive. "I'm torn," I admitted. Monarch is everything I believe in, but Montgomery is my family's legacy. "What does your gut tell you?" Tom asked, gathering the proposal documents. That I shouldn't trust them, I said honestly. That this sudden change of heart is too convenient, too driven by their desperation. Tom considered this. And what about your heart? The question caught me off guard. In the business world I navigated, decisions were supposed to be rational, data-driven, strategic. But this wasn't just a business decision. It was personal in ways that defied spreadsheets and projections. My heart says I miss my brothers, I admitted quietly. That despite everything, I want to believe they've genuinely changed their perspective. Tom nodded thoughtfully. Maybe there's a third option. Something beyond take the deal or reject it entirely. His words stayed with me as I left the office that evening, heading not home but to my mother's favorite restaurant, an upscale Italian place where she and I had occasionally met for lunch during my time at Montgomery Construction. I had called her that morning, requesting a private conversation. She was already seated when I arrived, looking elegant as always in a tailored suit, her graying hair perfectly styled. But there was something different about her, a slight tension around her mouth, a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Eliza," she said, rising to embrace me briefly. "You look well. Success suits you." I sat across from her, studying the woman who had stood silently by while my father had dismissed my capabilities and my dreams. My mother had always been the diplomatic one, the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts rather than confronted them. "How's Dad?" I asked directly after we'd ordered. Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Managing. The company is going through some adjustments." 20% staff layoffs is more than an adjustment, Mom. She set down her water glass with careful precision. "You've heard." "I've heard more than that," I continued. "About the quality issues, the lost clients, the declining morale. About Simon and Nathan's concerns." My mother's eyes widened slightly. "You've spoken with your brothers?" "They came to me," I confirmed, "with a proposal for me to return to Montgomery Construction as an equal partner." She was silent for a long moment, absorbing this information. "I see. And what did you tell them?" "That I needed time to think. That I had commitments to Monarch, to my team, to my investors." Our salads arrived, providing a brief respite from the conversation's intensity. When the server departed, my mother surprised me by reaching across the table to touch my hand, a rare gesture of physical affection from a woman who had always maintained careful composure in public. "Your brothers did this without your father's knowledge," she said quietly. "I know. Julian is struggling, Eliza. Not just with the business challenges. With you." I withdrew my hand, a reflexive response to the mention of my father. "I'm not responsible for his emotional state, Mom. He made his choice when he declared that Simon and Nathan would inherit everything." "Yes, he did," she acknowledged, surprising me again. "And it was wrong." The simple admission momentarily robbed me of words. In all the years of subtle discrimination, of overlooked achievements, of diminished opportunities, my mother had never once openly contradicted my father's decisions. "Why now?" I finally managed. "Why admit it was wrong now, after I've had to? Build something completely on my own?" She looked down at her plate, then met my gaze with unexpected directness. "Because I've seen what you've built. Because the Parkside project is exactly the kind of development this city needs. Because Monarch Development represents the future, while your father remains fixated on the past." She paused, then added more quietly, "And because watching you succeed has been like watching the person I might have been, if I'd had your courage." The revelation stunned me. My mother had always seemed content with her role as corporate wife and social coordinator, the woman behind the successful man. I had never considered that she might have harbored ambitions of her own, dreams that had been set aside in service to my father's vision. "Did you want something different, Mom? For yourself?" She smiled slightly. a wistful expression crossing her face. I studied architecture in college. Did you know that? I wanted to design sustainable housing before sustainable was even part of the conversation. Your grandfather, your father's father, thought it was charming that I had creative hobbies. The parallel to my own experience was unmistakable. The familial pattern of dismissing women's professional ambitions as cute diversions rather than serious pursuits had been repeating itself for generations. Why didn't you fight for it? I asked. For your career, your vision? It was a different time, she said simply. And I made my choices. But watching you refuse to accept the limitations placed on you, it's been both painful and profoundly inspiring. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the weight of her revelation settling between us. Finally, she spoke again. Whatever you decide about your brother's offer, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not just for Monarch's success, but for having the courage to walk away when walking away was necessary. Even though it's hurting Dad, hurting Montgomery Construction. She set her fork down deliberately. Montgomery Construction is struggling because your father refuses to adapt, not because you chose to build something innovative. The company needs your vision, Eliza. It always has. But that doesn't mean you owe them anything. As our main courses arrived, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. The Parkside Project's progress, my upcoming presentation to the City Council, even some gentle gossip about mutual acquaintances. But beneath the surface pleasantries, a fundamental shift had occurred. For perhaps the first time, my mother was seeing me, truly seeing me, as a businesswoman in my own right, not just as Julian Montgomery's daughter. When we parted outside, the restaurant, she embraced me again, holding on longer this time. Whatever you decide, she whispered, don't compromise your vision. It's too valuable. Driving home that night, I found myself thinking about Tom's suggestion of a third option and my mother's unexpected support. An idea began to form, not a complete solution, but a starting point, a way to test whether my brother's change of heart was genuine and sustainable. The next morning, I asked Maya and Tom to join me in my office, closing the door for privacy. I need your honest opinions, I began. Not as my employees, but as my partners in building Monarch. They exchanged glances, then nodded for me to continue. Montgomery Construction is proposing to acquire Monarch, to make it a division within their company, with me taking a partnership role alongside my brothers. Maya's expression tightened immediately. You'd lose control of your vision. They'd water it down, make it safe, make it Montgomery. That's what I'm afraid of, I agreed. But there might be another approach. I outlined the idea that had been taking shape since my dinner with my mother, not an acquisition of Monarch by Montgomery, but a targeted collaboration. A joint venture on specific projects that would allow both companies to maintain their independent identities while leveraging their respective strengths. Start with the Blackwell Riverfront project, I suggested. Propose it as a Montgomery Monarch joint venture. Montgomery brings their established reputation, their relationships with suppliers, their construction expertise. Monarch brings our innovative design, our sustainability focus, our community integration approach. Tom nodded slowly, considering the proposal. A test case. See if the collaboration works before committing to anything more permanent. Exactly. And it gives Simon and Nathan a chance to demonstrate that they're truly committed to a more equal partnership, to incorporating new approaches into Montgomery's conservative model. Maya still looked skeptical. And if it doesn't work? If they try to marginalize your input or dilute Monarch's vision? Then we walk away, I said simply. Monarch continues as an independent company. No harm to our reputation, our investor relationships, or our team. They mulled this over, both clearly weighing the potential benefits against the risks. For what it's worth, Tom said finally, I think it's brilliant. Cautious but not cynical. Open to possibility without being naive. Maya nodded, her reluctant. agreement. It could work. And the Blackwell project is big enough that neither company could easily complete it alone. There's a genuine business case for collaboration. That afternoon, I called Simon and Nathan, asking them to meet me at the Parkside project site, which was now nearing completion. I wanted them to see firsthand what Monarch had built, to understand my vision in concrete terms before I presented my counterproposal. As we walked through the nearly finished development, I pointed out the features that made it distinctive, the rooftop gardens that reduced energy costs while providing community growing space, the rainwater collection system that supplied the complex's irrigation needs, the mix of market rate and affordable units that created a diverse, integrated community. "This is impressive, Liz," Nathan said, with genuine admiration in his voice. "It feels completely different from a Montgomery project." "That's the point," I replied. "Monarch isn't trying to be Montgomery construction. We're building something different, serving a market segment Dad never considered valuable enough to pursue." Simon, ever the pragmatist, cut to the chase. "Have you made a decision about our offer?" I turned to face both of them, the Parkside development rising behind me, living proof of what I could create when freed from Montgomery's constraints. "I'm not accepting your acquisition proposal," I said directly. "Monarchs need to remain independent to preserve their vision and culture." Their disappointment was visible, Simon's expression hardening slightly, Nathan's shoulders slumping. "But," I continued, "I'm proposing an alternative, a joint venture on the Blackwell Riverfront project. Montgomery and Monarch as equal partners, combining our complementary strengths." Simon's eyebrows rose, interest replacing his initial disappointment. "A testing ground." "Exactly. We see if we can work together effectively, if our different approaches can truly complement each other rather than conflict. If it works, if you both are genuinely committed to treating me as an equal partner and respecting Monarch's innovative approach, then we can discuss more extensive collaboration." Nathan looked to Simon, their silent communication evident. After a moment, Simon nodded slowly. "It's a reasonable proposal," he acknowledged. "But Dad will need to be involved in that discussion." "I know," I said, the prospect of facing my father, after 6 months of estrangement sending a flutter of anxiety through my stomach. "And I'm ready for that conversation." As my brothers left the site, promising to arrange a meeting that would include our father, I felt a curious mixture of apprehension and hope. The growing success of Monarch had given me something I had never fully possessed before: leverage, confidence, and proof of my capabilities that even Julian Montgomery couldn't dismiss. The Blackwell project proposal was due in 3 days. By then, I would know whether this tentative family reconciliation had any chance of success, or whether Monarch and Montgomery were destined to remain competitors rather than collaborators. Whatever happened, one thing was certain: my backup plan had evolved from a desperate defense mechanism to thriving business to potential bridge back to my family, though on very different terms than any of us could have imagined 6 months ago. The Montgomery. Construction headquarters hadn't changed since I'd last walked through its doors 6 months ago. The same imposing mahogany reception desk. The same austere portraits of completed projects lining the walls. The same hushed atmosphere of corporate formality. But I had changed. The woman who stepped into the building that morning wasn't the same person who had walked out of her family's Sunday dinner, raw with rejection and burning with determination to prove herself. That woman had been defined by what she wasn't: not male, not valued, not worthy of inheritance in her father's eyes. The woman who returned now was defined by what she had created: a successful company, an innovative vision, a team that believed in her leadership. I wasn't seeking approval anymore. I was offering partnership from a position of strength. "Ms. Montgomery," the receptionist greeted me, surprise evident in her tone. "I'll let Mr. Montgomery know you're here." "Which Mr. Montgomery?" I asked, with a small smile. "There are 2, as I recall." She blinked, flustered. Your father, of course. He's expecting you. Of course she meant my father. In this building, Mr. Montgomery had only ever referred to one person, the founder, the patriarch, the undisputed authority. But that too was about to change, if my brother's proposal about equal partnership was sincere. Eliza. I turned to see Simon approaching from the executive corridor, his expression carefully neutral but his body language tense. He was playing it professionally, aware of watchful eyes around the reception area. The meeting's set up in the main conference room, he said, gesturing for me to follow him. Nathan's already there with Dad. As we walked together through the familiar hallways, Simon lowered his voice. Thanks for agreeing to this. I know it can't be easy, coming back here. It's not easy, I replied. It's about whether this joint venture makes business sense for both companies. Simon nodded, accepting my framing of the situation as purely professional. But we both knew better. This meeting wasn't just about the Blackwell Riverfront project. It was about family dynamics, inherited biases, and the possibility of reconciliation. The conference room door loomed ahead, and I felt a flutter of nerves despite my carefully cultivated composure. Behind that door waited the man who had dismissed my dreams, who had explicitly disinherited me from the family business, who had declared that my brothers would receive everything simply because they were male. Ready? Simon asked, his hand on the door handle. I squared my shoulders, channeling the confidence that had carried me through countless investor meetings and city council presentations. Ready? The room fell silent as we entered. Nathan sat midway down the long conference table, several folders and his laptop open in front of him. And at the head of the table, in the position he had occupied for 3 decades, sat my father. Julian Montgomery had aged visibly in 6 months. His hair seemed grayer, the lines around his mouth deeper, his shoulders slightly stooped in a way I had never observed before. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had intimidated employees and competitors alike, remained as sharp as ever as they fixed on me. Eliza, he said, his voice revealing nothing of what he might be feeling. Thank you for coming. Dad, I acknowledged with a slight nod, taking a seat directly across from Nathan. Not too close to my father. Not too distant. A position that signaled willingness to engage while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Simon sat beside me, creating a subtle but significant tableau. No longer 2 brothers aligned with their father on one side of the table and me alone on the other. We were arranged now in a more balanced configuration, hinting at the new dynamic we were here to discuss. I understand you have a proposal, my father began, getting straight to business, about the Blackwell project. I do, I confirmed, opening my portfolio. Monarch and Montgomery as joint venture partners, combining our complementary strengths and expertise. I laid out the concept Simon and Nathan had already heard at the Parkside site. Montgomery's established reputation and construction expertise paired with Monarch's innovative design approach and sustainability focus. A collaboration that would benefit both companies while allowing each to maintain its distinct identity. The Blackwell Riverfront project is ideally suited for this type of partnership, I continued, my voice steady and professional. It requires both the established credibility that Montgomery Construction brings and the forward-thinking, community-centered approach that defines Monarch development. My father listened without interruption, his expression unreadable as I went through the specifics, how responsibilities would be divided, how decisions would be made jointly, how profits would be shared equally. When I finished, he sat back, studying me with an intensity that once would have made me squirm. Now, I met his gaze evenly. Why this approach? He asked finally. Why not accept your brother's offer to return to Montgomery Construction as a full partner? The directness of the question confirmed what I had suspected. Simon and Nathan had already discussed their proposal with him. I wondered what that conversation had been like, how my father had responded to the suggestion that his daughter deserved equal standing with his sons. Because the monarch needs to remain independent, I answered honestly. I've built something I believe in, something with a distinct vision and approach. Absorbing it into Montgomery Construction would inevitably dilute that vision. Even with you as a partner here? He pressed. Even then, I confirmed. The Montgomery brand has 50 years of history and identity. That carries tremendous value, but also tremendous inertia. Monarchs need freedom to innovate, to take risks, to pursue projects that might not fit the traditional Montgomery model. My father nodded slowly, his fingers absently tapping the table, a habit I recognized from countless board meetings I had observed growing up. He was processing, considering, weighing options. And what happens if this joint venture fails? He asked. Always the pragmatist. If our approaches prove too incompatible to work together effectively, then we both walk away with valuable learning, I said simply. Monarch continues building its independent portfolio. Montgomery returns to its established client base. No permanent harm to either company, but a significant opportunity cost if Blackwell awards the project elsewhere, my father pointed out. This isn't a hypothetical test case, Eliza. It's a real development with real stakes. Exactly why it's the perfect project to test this partnership, I countered. The stakes are high enough that we'll all be motivated to make it work, to find compromises where necessary, to prove that collaboration is possible even with our different approaches. A ghost of a smile crossed my father's face, so brief I might have imagined it if I hadn't been watching him closely. You always did have a talent for seeing the strategic angle, he said quietly. The unexpected acknowledgement momentarily threw me. In all my years at Montgomery Construction, my father had rarely offered such direct praise, particularly about my business acumen. Your brothers tell me Monarch is thriving, he continued, shifting slightly in his chair. The Parkside project is impressive, innovative, exactly the kind of development this city needs more of. I glanced at Simon and Nathan, surprised by this apparent change in my father's perspective. Nathan gave me a small, encouraging nod. Thank you, I said, uncertain how to respond to this uncharacteristic recognition. I was wrong, my father said, abruptly, the words hanging in the air between us. I stared at him, wondering if I had misheard. Julian Montgomery did not admit mistakes. It wasn't in his nature, wasn't part of the infallible persona he had cultivated throughout his business career. Yet here he was, saying the three words I had never expected to hear from him. Wrong about what? I asked carefully. His gaze remained steady, direct. About you, about your capabilities, about your vision for what construction and development could be in this city. He paused, then added more quietly, about who deserves to carry on the Montgomery legacy. The admission was so unexpected, so contrary to everything I knew about my father, that for a moment I couldn't respond. I had prepared for resistance, for negotiation, for the need to prove my worth yet again. I hadn't prepared for this. What? Changed your mind? I finally managed, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. He gestured toward the window, where the city skyline was visible in the distance. The Parkside project, for one. Even half-finished, it's clearly something special, something Montgomery Construction would never have conceived of. A hint of wry self-awareness colored his tone. I'm stubborn, Eliza. Not blind. Quality speaks for itself. And for another? I prompted, sensing there was more. Your mother, he admitted, surprising me again. She's been vocal about her perspective since you left, about the opportunities she set aside because of similar prejudices in her generation, about how wrong we were to dismiss your vision. I tried to imagine my diplomatic, conflict-averse mother confronting my father about his treatment of me. It was almost impossible to picture, yet clearly it had happened, and had made an impact. And finally, my father continued, watching what happened to Montgomery Construction after you left, the quality issues, the lost clients, the declining morale. His voice tightened. I built this company on reliability and excellence. To see that reputation damaged, it forced me to examine what had changed. And what happened? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Me? He said simply. I lost objectivity, made decisions based on emotion rather than sound business judgment, became so focused on proving I'd been right to discount your approaches that I compromised the very standards I'd spent decades building. Yeah, was perhaps the most honest, self-aware statement I'd ever heard from my father. The admission seemed to cost him something. His knuckles whitened where they rested on the table, his jaw tightened momentarily, but he made it nonetheless. Nathan cleared his throat, breaking the tension. So, the joint venture proposal, he prompted. What do you think, Dad? My father looked at each of us in turn. Simon, serious and strategic. Nathan, diplomatic and people-focused. Me, innovative and determined. His children, each with distinct strengths, each with something valuable to offer the family business. I think it's brilliant, he said finally. A way to test collaboration without threatening either company's independence. Low risk, potentially. High reward. He nodded slightly in my direction. Strategic, as I said. Relief washed through me, followed quickly by a more complex emotion. This wasn't just about securing the Blackwell project or establishing a working relationship between Monarch and Montgomery. It was about transformation, my father's, my brother's, my own. About the possibility that people could change, could grow beyond the limitations of tradition and bias. There's one thing we haven't discussed, Simon said, always attentive to the practical details. The Blackwell proposal is due tomorrow. We can't completely redesign our separate submissions into a joint proposal overnight. We don't have to, I replied, an idea forming. We submit separate proposals as planned, but each includes an addendum outlining this joint venture possibility, explaining how our complementary approaches could create something more innovative and comprehensive than either company could achieve alone. My father nodded approvingly. Blackwell's always appreciated creative thinking. This kind of collaborative approach might appeal to him more than either standard proposal. We spent the next hour hammering out details, how to word the addendum, what specifics to include, how to frame the partnership in a way that highlighted the strengths of both companies. It was the most productive collegial discussion I'd ever had with my father and brothers, unmarred by the competitive undertones that had always characterized our professional interactions in the past. As we were wrapping up, my father cleared his throat, a sign I recognized from childhood as preceding some significant statement. There's one more matter I'd like to discuss, he said, his tone formal again. Not directly related to the Blackwell project, but relevant to our company's futures. We all looked at him expectantly. I've decided to step down as CEO of Montgomery Construction, he announced. Simon straightened in surprise. Nathan's mouth actually dropped open slightly. Of all possible outcomes from this meeting, this was perhaps the least expected. Julian Montgomery had always declared he would die at his desk. That retirement was for people without purpose or passion. Effective when? Simon asked, recovering first. Immediately, my father replied. The board meeting is scheduled for Friday. I'll formally recommend a new leadership structure then. Which is? I couldn't help asking, curiosity overcoming my attempt at professional distance. My father's gaze met mine directly. Co-CEOs. Simon and Nathan sharing leadership of Montgomery Construction with equal authority and clearly defined areas of responsibility based on their distinct strengths. I nodded slowly, processing what this meant. My brothers would still inherit the family business, still share the leadership role I had once hoped for. But before disappointment could fully form, my father continued. And I'll be recommending a strategic partnership committee consisting of the Montgomery Construction leadership and the CEO of Monarch Development to explore ongoing collaboration opportunities between our companies. Starting with, but not limited to, the the Blackwell Riverfront project. It wasn't the straightforward inheritance I had once dreamed of, but in many ways, it was better. I would maintain my independence with Monarch, continue building something truly mine, while still having influence and input into the family business. Not as an employee or subordinate, but as an equal partner with distinct expertise to contribute. The committee would have significant authority, my father added. Real power to shape the future relationship between Montgomery and Monarch, to identify projects where collaboration makes strategic sense, to establish standards and processes for joint ventures. I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. And you're comfortable with that level of integration between the companies? Comfortable? He gave a short laugh. No. Change is never comfortable at my age. But is it necessary? Yes. His expression softened slightly. The construction industry is evolving, Eliza. Montgomery needs to evolve with it, and Monarch is already positioning itself at the forefront of that evolution. This partnership isn't charity or family reconciliation. It's a sound business strategy. There it was again. Business. The justification for excluding me 6 months ago was now the rationale for including me. But this time, the business case was being made for my value, my vision, my leadership. Not because I was Julian Montgomery's daughter, but because I had proven myself as the founder and CEO of a successful, innovative company. As we concluded the meeting, my father stood and extended his hand to me formally. I look forward to seeing what Montgomery and Monarch can accomplish together, he said. I took his hand, noting the firmness of his grip despite the age showing in his face. So do I replied sincerely. Outside the conference room, Nathan caught up with me as I was preparing to leave. That went better than any of us expected, he said, relief evident in his voice. Yes, I agreed, still processing the dramatic shift in family dynamics I had just witnessed. It did. Dad's been different since you left, Nathan continued, lowering his voice. More reflective, less certain about everything. I think watching you succeed forced him to question assumptions he's held his entire life. I nodded, understanding what Nathan was trying to tell me. My departure, my independence, my success with Monarch, these hadn't just changed my life. They had changed my father's perspective, my brother's attitudes, and the entire family dynamic, our why. You coming to Sunday dinner this week? Nathan asked hesitantly. Mom's been asking. I think she'd really like to celebrate this new partnership. The invitation gave me pause. The family dinner table had been the site of my most painful rejection, the place where my father had explicitly excluded me from the family legacy. Returning there would be loaded with emotional significance, would require a level of forgiveness I wasn't entirely sure I felt yet. Let me think about it, I said honestly. Nathan nodded, understanding. Whatever you decide, we're moving forward with the joint venture proposal. This isn't contingent on family reconciliation, Liz. It's business. He grinned slightly, echoing our father's words with a hint of irony. As I left Montgomery Construction and headed back to Monarch's headquarters, I felt lighter somehow, as though a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted. The chip on my shoulder, the driving need to prove my father wrong, to show him and my brothers what they had rejected, had been a powerful motivator, but also a weight that had colored every decision, every achievement. Now, with my value acknowledged, with a partnership based on mutual respect taking shape, I could focus on building rather than proving, on creating rather than competing. The transformation wasn't just in my professional status or my relationship with my family, it was in how I saw myself, no longer defined by rejection or the need for validation, but by my own vision, my own accomplishments, my own path forward. The Rai woman who walked into the Monarch Development offices that afternoon was neither the daughter desperate for her father's approval, nor the rebel determined to prove him wrong. She was simply Eliza Montgomery, CEO of an innovative company, architect of her own success, ready to collaborate with Montgomery Construction, not from weakness or need, but from confidence and strength. That, perhaps, was the most profound transformation of all. 2 weeks after our joint venture proposal was submitted to Blackwell Properties, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink. My phone lay on the small table beside me, displaying the email that had just arrived from Edward Blackwell himself. I hadn't opened it yet. This moment, the anticipation, the possibility, felt worth savoring. Whatever the email contained would set the direction for both Monarch development and my complex family reconciliation. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the phone and opened the message. Ms. Montgomery, I'd like to meet with you and your father tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss your joint proposal for the Riverfront project. Please confirm your availability. Edward Blackwell. Not a definitive acceptance, but a promising sign. The fact that he wanted to meet with both of us suggested he was intrigued by the collaborative approach. I texted Simon immediately to relay the news. His response came quickly. Dad just got the same email. He's calling a strategy meeting at 4 p.m. today. Can you make it? Another meeting at Montgomery Construction. Another step in this careful dance of family reconciliation and business partnership. I confirmed my attendance, then called Maya and Tom to update them. This is huge, Maya said when I told her about Blackwell's response. If we land this project, Monarch jumps to a whole different league. And if the joint venture works, Tom added, it gives us access to larger projects without having to wait years to build our reputation. Big ifs, I cautioned, ever pragmatic despite the excitement bubbling beneath the surface. Blackwell hasn't accepted anything yet, and the joint venture is still entirely theoretical. When I arrived at Montgomery Construction that afternoon, the atmosphere was noticeably different from my previous visit. Instead of the hushed formality that had always characterized the office, there was a palpable energy, a sense of anticipation. People nodded and smiled as I passed, not the awkward acknowledgments I'd received before, but genuine expressions of respect. Word had spread about the potential Blackwell joint venture, and clearly, the staff saw it as a lifeline for a company that had been struggling. More than that, they seemed to recognize my role in creating this opportunity. It was a subtle but significant shift in perception. I was no longer just Julian Montgomery's daughter, but a valuable business partner in my own right. The conference room was already filled when I arrived. My father sat at the head of the table, with Simon and Nathan on either side. Several senior project managers and the company's chief financial officer rounded out the gathering. I took a seat midway down the table, placing my Monarch portfolio in front of me. Eliza, my father acknowledged, a hint of warmth in his tone that startled me. Thank you for joining us. Of course, I replied. This meeting affects both our companies. My father nodded, then turned to address the room. For those who haven't been briefed on the details, Monarch Development and Montgomery Construction have submitted a joint venture proposal for the Blackwell Riverfront project. Edward Blackwell has requested a meeting tomorrow to discuss our approach. One of the project managers, Robert Chen, who had been with the company since I was a child, raised his hand slightly. With all due respect, why a joint venture? Montgomery has handled all of Blackwell's projects for 20 years. It was a fair question, one that I suspected many in the room were wondering. My father glanced at me, then back to Robert. Because the Riverfront project requires capabilities that Monarch brings to the table, he said simply. Sustainable design, expertise, community integration approaches, innovative financing models that make the affordable housing components viable. The straightforward acknowledgement of Monarch's value, coming from my father in front of his senior team, was nothing short of revolutionary. This wasn't just a strategic move. It represented a fundamental shift in Julian Montgomery's thinking. Simon took over, walking the team through the specifics of our joint proposal, how responsibilities would be divided, how the two companies would collaborate while maintaining their distinct identities and approaches. As he spoke, I observed the reactions around the table. Initial skepticism gradually gave way to cautious interest, then to active engagement as people began to see the potential of combining Montgomery's established expertise with Monarch's innovative vision. The key, Nathan added, is that this isn't just a one-off collaboration. If this works, if we can successfully integrate our different approaches, it opens up possibilities for future joint ventures on projects that neither company could tackle alone. I listened with a mixture of pride and amazement. My brothers weren't just repeating my proposal, they had fully embraced it and had internalized the vision of complementary collaboration I'd outlined. They sounded genuinely excited about the possibility, not merely resigned to it as a necessary business compromise. "Eliza," my father said, turning to me, "would you walk us through how you envision the actual working relationship, the day-to-day coordination between our teams?" I opened my portfolio, pulling out the organizational chart I'd prepared. "I see 3 key integration points," I began, falling easily into the presentation mode that had become second nature over the past 6 months of pitching Monarch to investors and clients. As I outlined my vision for the collaboration, joint design reviews, integrated project teams, shared quality control processes, I noticed my father taking detailed notes, nodding occasionally at particularly innovative suggestions. This, too, was new. Julian Montgomery had never been one to visibly approve of others' ideas, preferring to collect information silently and then issue directives. The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours, diving deep into financial projections, timeline considerations, and potential challenges. Throughout, I was treated as an equal participant, not as an outsider, not as a junior team member, not as Julian's daughter, but as the CEO of a partner company with valuable expertise and perspectives. When we finally adjourned, my father asked me to stay behind. Simon and Nathan lingered as well, creating a moment of family privacy once the other team members had departed. "That went well," Nathan said, the relief evident in his voice. Simon nodded. "Better than expected. The team seems genuinely excited about the possibilities." My father was uncharacteristically quiet, his expression thoughtful as he gathered his notes. Finally, he looked up, his gaze moving between the 3 of us. "If Blackwell accepts this proposal," he said slowly, "it will represent a significant shift for Montgomery Construction, a new direction that will require adjustment from everyone, myself included." I waited, sensing there was more coming. "I've been thinking," he continued, "about what you said when you first proposed this joint venture, Eliza, about the Monarch needing to remain independent to preserve its vision." I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. "You were right," he said simply. "What you've built is valuable precisely because it's different from Montgomery Construction. Merging the companies would risk losing that distinctive approach." Simon and Nathan exchanged surprised glances. This wasn't just my father acknowledging my business acumen. It was him recognizing the value of a vision fundamentally different from his own. A seismic shift for a man who had always believed his way was the only way. "That said," he continued, "I also see tremendous potential in finding ways for our companies to collaborate, to create something greater than either could achieve alone." "The Strategic Partnership Committee," Nathan suggested, referencing the idea my father had mentioned during our previous meeting. "Yes," my father agreed, "but with one important modification." He turned to face me directly. "Equal representation. 3 members from Montgomery, 3 from Monarch. Shared leadership on any joint projects." The proposal went beyond even what I had hoped for, a true partnership of equals, not a token acknowledgement of Monarch's contributions. "I think that could work," I said carefully, not wanting to appear too eager. "Assuming Blackwell accepts our proposal and the joint venture proves successful." Indeed. My father closed his portfolio with a decisive motion. One step at a time. He stood, signaling the end of our discussion. We should all prepare for tomorrow's meeting. Edward Blackwell doesn't make decisions lightly. He'll have questions, concerns, perhaps even counterproposals. As we left the conference room, Simon fell into step beside me. That version of Dad, he said quietly. The one who just acknowledged someone else might have a better approach? I've never seen him before. Me neither, I admitted. It's disconcerting. Simon laughed softly. That's one word for it. Revolutionary might be another. He paused as we reached the elevator. Whatever happens with Blackwell tomorrow, you've already accomplished something remarkable, Liz. You've made Julian Montgomery reconsider his certainties. I didn't think that was possible. The observation stayed with me as I left Montgomery Construction and headed back to Monarch's offices. My original goal in founding the company had been straightforward: to prove my father wrong, to show him and my brothers that I could succeed in business without their support or approval. I had never imagined that success might actually change my father's perspective, might force him to recognize the limitations of his traditional approach. It was, as Simon had said, revolutionary, and potentially more valuable than any single contract or project, even one as significant as the Blackwell Riverfront development. The meeting with Edward Blackwell the next morning took place in his private office, a spacious corner suite with panoramic views of the city, including the riverfront site we hoped to develop. My father and I arrived separately but at the same time, creating an unintentionally symbolic image as we walked into the building together. Different yet aligned, distinct but coordinated. Blackwell greeted us warmly, offering coffee before getting down to business. He was a shrewd businessman in his 60s, known for his directness and his ability to see potential where others missed it. I've been reviewing your joint proposal, he began once we were seated. It's unexpected, innovative, potentially exactly what the riverfront needs. My father and I exchanged surprised glances. This was more positive than either of us had anticipated. That said, Blackwell continued, I have concerns. Joint ventures can be tricky, especially between companies with such different approaches and cultures. What happens if you can't agree on key decisions? If your visions for the project diverge? It was the same question my father had raised during our initial discussion. A legitimate concern that demanded a thoughtful response. We've established a detailed decision-making framework, I explained, opening my portfolio to the relevant section of our proposal. Clear areas of authority for each company based on our respective expertise, and a structured process for resolving any disagreements that arise. Blackwell nodded, examining the framework carefully. And the leadership structure? Who would be the primary contact for my company? My father leaned forward slightly. Joint project directors. One from Montgomery Construction, one from Monarch Development, working as equal partners with their respective teams. And you're both comfortable with this arrangement? Blackwell asked, his gaze moving between us. This level of shared authority? We are, my father confirmed, surprising me, with the confidence in his tone. Both companies bring essential expertise to this project. Success requires genuine collaboration, not one company subordinate to the other. Blackwell sat back, studying us with the shrewd assessment of someone who had navigated complex business relationships for decades. Interesting. Very interesting. He tapped his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. You know, Julian, when I first heard that Eliza had started her own development company, I wondered how you'd respond, given your traditional approach to business succession. My father's expression remained carefully neutral. I've come to recognize that traditions should evolve when necessary. Blackwell smiled slightly. Evidently. He turned to me. The Parkside project is impressive. Exactly the kind of forward-thinking development this city needs. When I saw your name associated with it, I wasn't entirely surprised. You always had insights your father sometimes missed. With all due respect, Julian. My father nodded, accepting the observation without visible offense, another sign of how much he had changed in recent months. That's why this joint venture proposal intrigues me, Blackwell continued. Montgomery Construction's proven reliability combined with Monarch's innovative vision. It could be the perfect approach for the riverfront, which needs both historic sensitivity and fresh thinking. He stood, moving to the large windows that overlooked the city. I've received 4 proposals for this project, 2 from national firms with impressive portfolios but limited local knowledge, 1 from Montgomery Construction alone, which, forgive me, Julian, felt somewhat outdated in its approach to community integration and sustainability. My father winced slightly, but didn't disagree. And then your joint proposal, Blackwell concluded, turning back to face us, which addresses every aspect of the project in ways none of the others managed to do. I held my breath, sensing what was coming but hardly daring to believe it. I'm Pi. Accepting your proposal, Blackwell said simply. Subject to final contract negotiations, of course, but the joint venture approach is exactly what this project needs. The significance of the moment wasn't lost on me. This wasn't just a major contract for Monarch, a validation of everything I'd built over the past 6 months. It was also a vindication of my vision, my approach, my insistence that there was room for innovation alongside tradition in our city's development landscape. More than that, it represented a fundamental reversal in my family dynamics. My father, who had once dismissed my business acumen and excluded me from the family legacy, was now acknowledging my value as an equal partner. My brothers, who had stood by while I was disinherited, were now actively working to include me in Montgomery Construction's future. As we left Blackwell's office, contract outline in hand, my father paused in the hallway. For a moment, he seemed uncertain, an expression I had rarely seen on his face in all the years I'd known him. Congratulations, Eliza, he said finally. This project, it wouldn't have happened without the Monarch. Without your vision, the acknowledgement, so simple yet so profound, caught me off guard. Thank you, I managed. It wouldn't have happened without Montgomery Construction either. That's the point of the joint venture. Complementary strengths. He nodded, a hint of pride in his expression, pride in me, in what I had accomplished, in what we might build together. Your mother was right, he said, more to himself than to me. You always saw possibilities the rest of us missed. As we rode the elevator down to the lobby, standing side by side in companionable silence, I realized just how complete the reversal had been. 6 months ago, I had walked out of my parents' home determined to prove my father wrong, to succeed despite his dismissal of my capabilities. Now, I had not only succeeded, but had changed my father's perspective so fundamentally that he was acknowledging my vision as valuable, perhaps even essential, to the family business's future. The doors opened, and we stepped out into the busy lobby, my father in his traditional tailored suit, me in the more contemporary professional attire that reflected Monarch's modern approach. Different styles, different generations, different visions, yet now aligned in purpose, united in a partnership that would transform not just a neglected riverfront, but perhaps our family as well. Sunday dinner, my father said abruptly as we reached the building's entrance. Your mother we would like you to come, this weekend, to celebrate the Blackwell contract. The invitation was awkward, clearly difficult for him to extend. Julian Montgomery had never been good at personal reconciliation, at acknowledging emotional needs or relationships, but he was trying, in his way, to rebuild the connection that had been severed that day around the family dinner table. I hesitated, the memory of that painful rejection still fresh despite the professional progress we'd made. I'll think about it, I said finally. He nodded, accepting my caution as reasonable. Whatever you decide, he said carefully, The joint venture moves forward. This is business, not contingent on family reconciliation. Thank you, I replied, genuinely appreciative of his understanding. I'll let you know. As we parted ways, outside the building, he toward the Montgomery construction offices, I toward Monarch's headquarters, I felt a curious lightness. The weight of proving myself, of validating my worth against my father's dismissal, had lifted. In its place was something new and unfamiliar, the freedom to choose my relationship with my family based on present reality rather than past wounds. The reversal was complete. I had gone from excluded daughter to valued partner, from disinherited family member to essential collaborator, from someone defined by what she wasn't to someone recognized for what she had created. Walking back to Monarch, I composed a text message to Maya and Tom. Blackwell accepted the joint venture proposal. We got the riverfront contract, meeting in 30 minutes to discuss next steps. Their responses came immediately. Enthusiastic congratulations, excited emojis, promises of champagne to celebrate. Their joy reinforced what I already knew. Whatever happened with my family relationship, I had built something valuable at Monarch. A company, yes, but also a team, a culture, a vision that would continue to thrive whether or not I ever fully reconciled with the Montgomerys. That knowledge, that my success existed independently of my family's approval or rejection, was perhaps the most significant reversal of all. I had set out to prove my father wrong, but had ended up proving myself right. And in doing so, I had created not just a successful business, but a life defined by my own choices rather than others' limitations. The backup plan had become the main plan, and it was more successful than I could have imagined. 3 days after securing the Blackwell Riverfront contract, I found myself pacing my office at Monarch Development, staring at the unanswered text from my mother. We really hope you'll join us for dinner on Sunday. The whole family will be there. The whole family. I hadn't been part of the whole family since the day my father had announced that my brothers would inherit everything. The invitation represented both an opportunity and a risk, a chance for meaningful reconciliation, but also the possibility of reopening wounds that had just begun to heal. Decision time? Maya asked, leaning against my office doorframe with 2 cups of coffee. I accepted one gratefully. How did you know? She smiled, nodding toward my phone on the desk. You've been staring at that text message for 3 days. And you just agreed to a joint venture with your family's company after they explicitly cut you out 6 months ago. Don't take a detective to figure out you're wrestling with something. I sighed, sinking into my chair. My mother wants me to come to Sunday dinner. The first one since everything happened. Maya sat across from me, her expression thoughtful. And you're afraid of what? That nothing's really changed, I admitted. That the professional respect my father's showing now is just business pragmatism, not a genuine shift in how he sees me or values me. Does it matter? She asked, surprising me. I mean, you've already proven yourself. Monarchs are thriving. We just landed the biggest contract in the company's history. Your personal value isn't dependent on your father's recognition anymore. She was right, of course. The professional validation I'd once craved from my father was unnecessary now. I had built something successful, something meaningful, something that existed entirely independent of the Montgomery name or legacy. But family was complicated. Despite everything, these people were still my blood, still connected to me in ways that transcended business relationships or professional achievements. I think I need to go, I said finally. Not for their sake, but for mine. To face them as equals in the same space where they once dismissed me. To close that chapter properly. Maya nodded, understanding. Just remember, whatever happens at that dinner, you come back here on Monday as the CEO of Monarch Development. partner in the biggest urban renewal project this city has seen in decades. That doesn't change, regardless of how your family receives you. Sunday evening arrived with an unseasonable thunderstorm, rain lashing against my car windows as I drove the familiar route to my parents' suburban home. The weather matched my turbulent emotions, anticipation mixed with anxiety, hope tempered by caution. I parked in the circular driveway behind Simon's luxury sedan and Nathan's more modest hybrid, noting that nothing about the house had changed. Same. Manicured lawn, same elegant facade, same warm lights glowing through the windows. It was as if the past 6 months had never happened, as if I might walk through the door and find myself back at that fateful dinner where everything had fractured. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open. My mother stood there, elegant, as always in a simple dress, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Eliza," she said softly. "You came." "I said I would," I replied, stepping inside and handing her the bottle of wine I'd brought, a selection from a small, sustainable vineyard that Monarch had featured in the Parkside Project's restaurant space. She took it, her fingers brushing mine in a brief, warm contact. "Everyone's in the living room. Your father's been checking the time every 5 minutes." The revelation of my father's nervousness was oddly reassuring. Julian Montgomery, always so confident and commanding, anxious, about a family dinner. Perhaps I wasn't the only one feeling the weight of this moment. The living room fell silent as I entered. Nathan and his girlfriend Raven were seated on the sofa, Simon in his usual armchair, and in his habitual place by the fireplace stood my father, a glass of scotch in his hand, his expression carefully composed. "Eliza," he said, his voice gruffer than usual. "Thank you for coming." The formality might have seemed cold if I hadn't known him so well, hadn't recognized it as his way of navigating emotionally complex situations. This wasn't the dismissive father who had cut me out of the family legacy. This was a man attempting, however awkwardly, to rebuild a connection he had damaged. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied, matching his tone while accepting a glass of wine from my mother. Nathan broke the tension, rising to introduce Raven properly. "You two met briefly at the Parkside groundbreaking," he reminded me. "I remember," I said, smiling at the young woman who seemed both nervous and curious. "You were asking all the right questions about the sustainable energy systems." "It's fascinating work," Raven said warmly. "Nathan's been showing me more of Monarch's projects. The integrated approach is really impressive." The conversation flowed more easily after that, focusing initially on safe topics, the Blackwell contract, the innovative aspects of the joint venture, and the positive press both companies had received. My mother expertly guided the discussion, drawing each person in, creating momentary connections that slowly began to ease the underlying tension. When we moved to the dining room, the very space where my father had delivered his devastating declaration 6 months ago, I felt a momentary hesitation. The grandfather clock still ticked in the hallway. The crystal chandelier still cast its soft light over the polished table. But the energy was different, charged with possibility rather than painful certainty. My father took his seat at the head of the table, as always. But instead of directing me to sit at the far end, as had been the pattern throughout my childhood, my mother guided me to the seat at his right hand, the position traditionally reserved for the most honored guest or the most senior family member. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Simon, who had always occupied that chair at family gatherings. He gave me a small nod, acknowledging the shift without resentment. Another change, another sign that the family dynamics were evolving in ways I hadn't dared to hope. Dinner progressed pleasantly, the excellent food and wine facilitating increasingly relaxed conversation. We discussed the Blackwell project in greater detail, my brothers asking thoughtful questions about Monarch's approach, my father occasionally offering insights from his decades of experience in the industry. It was the kind of professional exchange I had always wanted with my family, but had never experienced: respectful, engaged, collaborative. As dessert was served, however, the conversation inevitably turned to more personal matters. "I've been following Monarch's progress," my mother said, her tone carefully casual. "The press has been quite favorable, especially about your leadership." "Style, Eliza," I nodded, accepting the observation without elaboration. "Different from Montgomery Construction," my father said abruptly. "A different approach entirely." The room stilled, everyone sensing the potential for conflict in his comment. But when I looked at him directly, I saw no criticism in his expression, only a kind of rueful self-awareness. "Yes," I agreed. "That was intentional." "It was necessary," he corrected, surprising me. "The industry is changing. Clients want something different now. Sustainability, community integration, social responsibility. Things I always treated as secondary to profitability and structural integrity." My brothers exchanged glances, clearly as startled as I was by our father's candid admission. "Both approaches have merit," I offered, unwilling to dismiss the company. My grandfather had built, and my father had grown. "That's why the joint venture makes sense. We bring different strengths to the table." My father set down his fork, his expression serious. "I need to say something, to all of you, but especially to you, Eliza." Here it was, the confrontation I had been both anticipating and dreading. The moment when all the professional progress we had made might collapse under the weight of unresolved personal issues. "I was wrong," he said simply, the words hanging in the air between us. "Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads."